completely disrupted, in fact destroyed, by Potts's economic insecurities. So that when Potts accrues debt, their younger child is sold. And later their oldest daughter, Anne, is sold for about 5,000 pounds of tobacco.
When Captain Pott died, his widow inherited a farm, farm animals, and Emmanuel. However, by 1661, court records show that Emmanuel had attained his freedom, leased 145 acres, and expanded his livestock holdings.
Even if you get your freedom, as a black person, your life is not going to be like that of a free white person. Emmanuel Dragus gets his freedom. He leases land. He's got to pay many times what a white person would have paid to lease that land. He is not treated like your average free person. Race is really by now a factor and becoming a more and more significant factor.
By 1665, Maryland and New York had legalized slavery. 3 years earlier, Virginia lawmakers decreed, "All children born in Virginia shall be held bond or free according to the condition of the mother."
Even children of, say, a white master and a slave woman, it makes those children not free, it makes them slave. It makes them chattel, it makes them valuable. It makes the white father a slave owner of his own children.
Black men and black women raised thousands of mulatto children as families. That love of children transcended the pain and the horror of how that child was created. Unlike some Europeans who created these children and saw their lives so meaningless and insignificant that they sold them no differently than any other slave.
Emmanuel Dragus continued to see to the needs of his enslaved children. He transferred title to livestock to them later on, hoping against hope that the livestock might be a source for some route to freedom for them.
The court records of September 29, 1673 state, "I, Emmanuel, grant unto my said 2 daughters 1 bay mare." The same day he granted another mare to his free children. Despite his efforts, Emmanuel could not free Thomas and Anne, the son and daughter sold by Captain Pott. However, because Thomas married a free black woman, his children were born free.
One of those children was named Frances, born in about 1677. Though she was free, she was bound out to serve a local blacksmith planter named John Brewer.
Frances entered the service of the blacksmith in 1694. Later that year, she found herself in court, charged by John Brewer with the sin of fornication. No partner was named. 17-year-old Frances was sentenced to 30 lashes. In addition, her servitude to Brewer was extended for 2 years. Months later, Frances was back in court, this time charged with having a child out of wedlock.
It becomes increasingly difficult for free blacks to make their case before a court of law. Frances Dragus accuses her master of fathering her child. Now, the court won't hear of this. They will not take the word of a black woman against that of a white man, and especially a white man who is a planter.
This throws the court into an uproar. The justices decide to send the case on to a higher level. However, they do sentence her to yet another whipping. Her master, John Brewer, decides he's had enough of Frances and assigns her to another man. Frances brings a court case against this move.
Judges were still unlikely to accept the testimony of a black woman against a white man. Undeterred, Frances argued that Brewer was conspiring to place her in a community where her status as a free woman would not be recognized. The letter binding Frances to Brewer was ruled invalid.
Frances actually wins her suit and she's released from the terms of her indenture. Frances is really extraordinary because there are very few black women who are able to use the courts in the way that she does. Unfortunately, her father has died, her mother is sick, and by 1700, Frances is impoverished and destitute. She reappears in the courts because, in a desperate act, she steals food to try to feed herself and her child.
She decides that she'd better link up to another household again, become a servant, have some steady kind of support, so she binds over herself and her children to Isaac and Bridget Foxcroft. She promises to serve them for 10 years, and any children that she has are to serve for 25 years.
Now, if you were a free black woman, what are you going to do? There were very few means of making money for any woman in the colony. To be free, ironically, meant that you were going to be impoverished. And in fact, you could find yourself worse off than someone who was enslaved.
Isaac Foxcroft had promised Frances freedom upon his death. However, when he died, his widow assigned Frances and her children to another master. Again, Frances sought justice. Without a document and only her word for evidence, the court ruled against her. After 1704, she disappeared from the public record.
In Virginia and a number of other colonies, the Atlantic Creoles knew how to negotiate their way through this system and win gains and advantages for themselves. Limited gains sometimes, but gains nonetheless. It had gone from a situation where they could do that to a situation where there was no space left to do that.
The small group of elite Virginia planters have committed to the use of race slavery to expand their tobacco holdings. 1691, they forbid free blacks from living in certain counties. If you're African American, you cannot have an education. You cannot move about freely. You cannot hold property. All of these constraints are falling in on one generation.
It's a link in a chain of slavery whereby people cannot become free. Before this, there were ways of becoming free.
Slavery is replacing indentured servitude as the labor system of choice. And by the beginning of the 18th century, it is clear that through law in the Chesapeake, slavery is being made a racially based institution, and people are being considered property.